Welcome to Intimacy Evolution, the podcast that helps you enjoy deeper connection and more intimacy in your relationships. I'm Brianna Carey, relationship and intimacy coach, and together with my husband Mark, a licensed professional counselor, we're here to help couples create the relationships they crave. Relationships evolve over time, and that's okay. Let's talk about it. Welcome, Lindsay Lockett, to Intimacy Evolution.
Oh,
I am thrilled to have you here. Like I was saying before, Mark and I have followed you for a while on Instagram and just love the work that you're doing. And I know that our listeners are going to get a lot from our conversation today. So,
I hope so. Let's dive in.
yeah. Yeah. So, how about you give us just a little background of who you are, and then we can delve into how you got into nervous system healing and trauma work.
Yeah, I don't even think I can tell you who I am without telling you how I got into nervous system
Yeah,
healing and
do it.
trauma work. Okay, so the very, very short Cliff's Notes version of my story is that I was raised in evangelical Christianity in the Bible Belt in the South. I grew up in West Texas in the Southern Baptist Church. I was a part of the purity culture movement and true love waits and the being a Proverbs 31 woman and my only calling in life being to be a godly wife and mother and blah blah blah. I also grew up in a home with uh a lot of big T and little T trauma, which I don't like
Mhm.
using big T and little T, but yeah, I grew up with a physically abusive stepfather, but the majority of my trauma and complex PTSD actually comes from emotional abandonment and neglect by my mother.
Mm.
So I have, yeah, I have an ACEs score of 6, but then I also have a lot of, just overly critical parents, emotionally unavailable parents, parents expecting perfectionism, not meeting my emotional needs, et cetera, et cetera. So, essentially, I think I've had anxiety for my whole life. I used to
Mm.
go to the nurse's office with a stomach ache a few times a month when I was in elementary school. And now I look back and I'm like, oh, I was very anxious and it was manifesting in my gut. And I just
Yeah.
thought I had a tummy ache and needed to go to the nurse's office, but actually it was coming from just being so anxious from the environment that I was growing up in. Anyway,
Yeah.
I grew up, and when I was 19, I married the man I'm still married to today. We met in church and we're both super, super involved in church. Had both My husband is a pastor's son,
Mm.
and his entire family is Baptist pastors. And so I thought I'd always wanted to marry a pastor. And so whenever we met, I was just like, oh my gosh, all my dreams are coming true. I've met this godly man and I'm going to marry this pastor and we're going to be in ministry and live happily ever after. And it was happily ever after for 12 years. And
Mm.
then in 2014, we started questioning some of our Christian beliefs. We were on staff at a church at that time.
Mm.
And we started kind of secretly questioning at night whenever we would be alone. We'd
Yeah.
watch YouTube videos or listen to podcasts or documentaries or something that was just the rabbit hole we were going down at that time to deconstruct our faith. Did not
Mm.
expect that it would lead to completely deconverting from Christianity, but eventually that did happen.
Mhm.
In 2015, we moved from Texas to northeastern Minnesota where we knew no one, and it was our first time ever to be, so far away from our Christian families that it was, the first time ever that we felt like we got to feel like what life was like without our families being, 20 minutes away and being together with our families all the time and, really establishing an identity as a family of our own at that point.
Mm.
And then my anxiety started to ramp up really, really bad in 2016, 2017. I started going to therapy for the first time. I was doing EMDR.
Mhm.
I found EMDR to be extremely helpful for all of the religious trauma stuff and processing my stepfather's physical abuse and all
Mm.
of that kind of stuff. But then in late 2018, my husband and I started going through hell, basically. Like Murphy's Law was at work in our lives, in
Mhm.
like every aspect of our lives. Basically anything that could go wrong did go wrong. So we were just experiencing like stress from literally every source possible. While raising 2 young teenage children and living 1,200 miles away from our families, and yeah, it was awful, and, but I found that EMDR wasn't really helpful for that. So what I've
Okay.
discovered for myself anyway, and I've heard this echoed from other people, is that EMDR is really, really helpful for things that are, like, far gone in the past and, like, have ended
Mhm.
and have resolution, but, like, if you're actively going through a really stressful or potentially traumatizing period of life, that it's not
Yeah.
super helpful for something that hasn't ended. Um,
Right.
so it wasn't helpful anymore. I stopped sleeping in, like, October of 2018, started having really severe anxiety, panic attacks, also having some pelvic pain during that time that I
Mhm.
couldn't find a cause for, and then, of course, all the other shit going on in our lives that felt really awful.
Uh-huh.
Am I allowed to say shit on your podcast?
Oh, yeah. 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 Speak
Um,
freely.
yeah, just all the other junk that was going on in our lives. And that culminated in March of 2019. I actually attempted to take my own life on March
Oh.
7th. And yeah, it was just the anxiety and the insomnia and the pelvic pain had gotten so bad that I just felt completely lost and hopeless and didn't see how I could ever just be my normal self again. Checked
Mhm.
myself into psychiatric hospital, voluntarily stayed there for 5 days, checked myself out on a cocktail of psych medications. Before all of this time, for, like, a decade, I had been on what I now call the hamster wheel of wellness, like, chasing symptoms with supplements and restrictive healing diets, and got really involved in the health and wellness and nutrition world and, like, made it a study,
Mhm.
became a health coach, like, did all the things. And so, of course, during 2018 and 2019, whenever my anxiety and insomnia and pelvic pain were so bad, like, that's what I had to fall back on. So I was, like, trying to change my diet and take a bunch of supplements and try different natural healing things to try to, like, fix these things about myself, and they weren't getting any better. And yeah, whenever I was in the psych hospital, I didn't have access to all of my fancy, special, healthy food and my expensive supplements and all my health gadgets. And I didn't have
Mm.
access to any of those things. And I found that I did not get worse. And so I was like,
Uh.
I wonder if there's something here. So yeah, that was kind of my first wake up call into like the world of trauma and the nervous system where I was like, okay, all of these things that I thought were what I needed to be well, I've like been doing them for a decade and I
Mm.
still have all these chronic and mysterious symptoms. I still have this anxiety. I still have like air quotes mental health issues or whatever. And
Yeah.
clearly if the diets and the supplements were what I needed to be well, I would have been well. I
Right.
wasn't, and so being without all that stuff in the hospital for that week was kind of a wake-up call to be like, "Okay, I must be missing something."
Mm.
And so I made a promise to myself to be like, "Okay, I haven't always been on psych meds. I know how to live not being on psych meds. I don't wanna be on these medications forever, even though they're really helpful right now.
Yeah.
So I need to figure out what got me to this point and, like, dig my way out of it."
Yeah.
So that's essentially what I started doing.
Mm.
Somewhere in there, I got a whiff of the nervous system. I'm a projector in human design, so I
Okay.
love to just, like, learn everything I can about something that's really interesting to me and then, like, trial and error it to figure out what works. So that's what I started doing, and yeah, discovered that that was, like, a missing link for me, and
Yeah.
I'd never approached my body that way before. Like, I'd always approached my body from the lens of, like, there's something wrong and I need to fix it, and that's what all of these, like, healing diets and supplements and Jesus, even religion, like, this is what that was for, right? Like, "Fix me,
Yeah.
God." Um, and so, yeah, I realized very quickly that I actually didn't need fixing and that all of the sensations and symptoms I was having was really my body's, like, wise and loving way of trying to send me a message and be like,
Mm.
"Hey, I need some help and support, and I need to, like, offload some stress and feel some feelings," and
Yeah.
So that's the journey I started on, and here I am today, not on psych meds, no longer living with, like, daily constant anxiety, no longer having stomach aches.
Yeah.
And I did it without, like, all the things that I thought I needed to be well. I did it
Mm.
without all that. So, it's not that I don't prioritize, like, nourishing my body and taking care of myself
Right,
and all that, I absolutely do, but I've been in that health and wellness world where you put all your eggs in that basket and you think it's gonna
right.
fix you, and then you're like, "Well, shit." Turns out I was missing a few things, you know?
Right, right, and I think oh my gosh, yes. Thank you for sharing, that was just really insightful for me to hear this journey, and then I can see it, like, a lot of different pieces that, um, just clicking and, like, are nurses in elementary schools or, in school systems, are they looking for those
Yeah,
symptoms and being like, "Hey, what's going on?" So just
exactly.
little things like that. I'm like, like, what if somebody had intervened and said, like, something like, "Hey, is everything okay at home? Are you stressed about anything? What's going" with that? Just things like that was coming up when you were
Totally.
talking.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the '80s and '90s, like, school
Uh-huh.
nurses weren't asking questions like that in the '80s and '90s, like, now, maybe, I
Yeah.
think now maybe, but I also was, like, one of those girls and, like, I'm a firstborn, I'm the oldest of 3
Mhm.
kids, I have 2 younger brothers, so as much as I hate it, I do have a, like, very stereotypical, like, oldest daughter syndrome.
Same. Same.
Who, like, takes care of all the emotional needs of the family and feels extremely
Right.
protective of the younger brothers and, like, I mean,
I'm fine, take care of them,
yeah, it's
like
no surprise I grew up and became, like, a mental health coach, you know what I mean? Like, it's not a
yeah,
surprise, like, I
yeah.
might as well have grown up and become a therapist essentially because I have that stereotype, but, yeah, I mean, I was really high functioning as a kid, like,
Mm,
I performed really well in school, I made good grades, I was always in the good graces of my teachers,
yeah.
I was well liked by my teachers, I never really felt like I fit in with the kids at school, so I definitely had some, like, weird belonging issues, like,
Yep.
that I've had to kind of unpack later in my life and realize where those came from. But yeah, I don't think any of my teachers or any of the adults in my church would have even had a clue what was going on at home because I just presented so normal.
Yep. Yep. I've seen a meme about that. It's like, "Hey, all you firstborn daughters,
Mhm.
like, how's your anxiety now?" or something, and I'm like,
Yep.
"Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's we're all in this together.
Yep.
We all are very similar." And so, um, can we zoom in just a little bit on, like, you talked about the emotional neglect piece, like, there's the physical abuse, right? We understand, like, that's gonna be very impactful, but how have you worked through the emotional neglect piece? And then especially, children are our biggest mirrors. And so once you became a mom, like how has that been like presenting itself and how do you work through that in the nervous system?
That's such a deep question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I became a mom. I mean, I had 2 kids by the time I was 22.
Okay.
So, like, I did not have the first clue about the nervous system. I had no trauma awareness. I wouldn't have
Mm,
even told you at that time that I had anxiety. Like, even though now I look back and I'm like, "Oh, all of that, like, obsessive and compulsive cleaning that I
yeah.
was doing instead of, like, just enjoying my babies and resting." Now I get where that comes
Mhm.
from, but, like, back then, that wasn't anywhere in my awareness.
For sure.
And but the thing that was in my awareness, which is interesting, is that one of the main ways that my mom used to, emotionally abandon and neglect me was by giving me the silent treatment.
Mm,
And, I knew as soon as I became a mother that I never wanted to give my kids the silent treatment.
yeah.
So, like, I can say that even without knowledge of the nervous system or trauma or complex trauma or whatever, that I still had this awareness of how bad it felt to get the silent treatment from her. And I like just promised myself I would never give my kids the silent treatment. And I never did. Um, but now I look back at my motherhood journey and like I didn't start doing what I do now or even having the language and the awareness that I have now until my kids were like mid teenagers, you know? My
Yeah.
kids were like
Yeah.
15, 16. before this really became real for me.
Mhm.
So, if I had had the knowledge that I have now as a much younger mom, like, yes, there are absolutely things I would have done differently. Um,
Yeah.
and it's been really interesting to have gone through my own journey of, like, emotional abandonment by my mom and not raising my kids by giving them the silent treatment, but, like, being able to look back and see, like, other ways that I didn't show up for them emotionally and, like, and we've even had conversations now that they're older. My son is 20 and my daughter's 19, and so we've had
Oh.
conversations since they've been older about little things that they're starting to notice in themselves.
Mhm.
Like, for example, a few months ago, my daughter came to me and told me that she was, like, struggling with food and that she had this, like, voice in her head that was shaming her whenever she ate sugar or, like, that she always had this voice in her head that was telling her what she ate wasn't healthy enough and that it was bad for
Yeah.
her, but then all she was craving was, like, sweets and processed food, and she just felt
Yeah.
really confused, and I was like, "Honey, you know where that comes from, right?" And she was like, "No, I don't." And I was like, "I did that to you. Like, I did that. I was
Yeah.
such a perfectionist. When I came into the world of health and wellness, I brought all of my already dysregulated patterns into that with me. Like, I was
Yeah.
already hypervigilant. I was already a perfectionist. I was already anxious. But then
Mm.
into the world of health and wellness just gave me another outlet for anxiety, perfectionism, and hypervigilance, right? So, like, I
Mm.
became really hypervigilant about what we were eating and what symptoms we might have and, like, needing to fix those, and I became really anxious about, like, health.
Yeah.
Like, if my kid had a rash, it was like, "Oh my god, we have to, like, take everything out of your diet and heal your gut."
Mm.
Like, going to an extreme. Um,
Yeah.
being, like, hypervigilant with my body all of a sudden, like, suddenly every new noise and symptom and sensation, like, meant that something was terribly
So
wrong with my health, you know?
yeah.
So, like, I
Mm.
absolutely put that on my kids, so it's
Mhm.
not surprising now that my daughter's an adult and she has this, like, critical voice in her head around food, and it's like, "Honey, that's not your authentic voice. That's my
Yeah.
voice that's morphed into your inner critic."
Mm.
But you also ask, what was the journey like for me to, like, heal that emotional neglect? And,
Yeah.
that has been, like, a more recent journey. That's been something that I've faced head on just in the last 2
Mm.
years. Um, and it actually took going down and staying with my mom after she had a major back surgery. She asked me to come stay for, like, 2 weeks and help take care of her, and of
Wow.
course, I said I would, but I hadn't seen my mom because of COVID, I hadn't seen her since 2020, so this was, like, 2 years later.
Wow.
So, just for the timeline reference, I attempted suicide in March of 2019.
Mhm.
A year and a half later, my mom came to visit in the fall of 2020, and then I didn't see her for 2 years until the fall of 2022. So, we had been, like, texting and talking on the phone, but we hadn't been around each other to interact in any kind of way where we would, like, bump up against each other or might
Mhm.
boundary or someone might get triggered. Like, we hadn't been around each other in that capacity.
Yeah.
Well, from the fall of 2022 to the fall or from the fall of 2020 to the fall of 2022, like, Lindsay's been, like, doing some serious work on herself, you know? Like,
Uh-huh.
I've been up here in Minnesota, my mom's down there in Texas, and I've been, like, devouring information about complex PTSD and learning about boundaries and, like, connecting with my own anger and, like, figuring out
Mm.
what I feel about that, just, like, all these different things, and so when I went to visit my mom in the fall of 2022, I was a totally different person than the daughter she had seen 2 years earlier, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't think I realized how impactful that would be for both of us.
Mm.
So, my mom's sort of pattern whenever I was a kid was that I would, like, for example, come home from school and, like, put my backpack down, and the way our house was laid out, if I walked around the corner into the kitchen, if my mom was cooking or something, like, her back would be turned to me, and I think what every kid, like, wants and needs is, like, if you've been separated from your mom all day, you want her to just, like, put everything down and turn around and, like, open her arms and be like, "You're home.
Yeah.
Hi, I missed you. Tell me about your day. What did you do?" Right? Like, that's what we
Yeah.
want and need, but that is not what I got. Like, a lot of the times, she just wouldn't turn around and even acknowledge that I was at home, And so then being a very like empathic, highly sensitive child, like just her not turning around and acknowledging me would immediately set off like a spidey sense that something was wrong.
Yeah.
And like Dr. Russ Kennedy talks about how in children, the fight flight response is used in pursuit of the parent.
Mm.
Like children don't run away from the parent or fight back. They generally are like trying to pursue and reestablish that attachment connection. And so,
Yeah.
like, my flight response, because it was anxiety, was, like, fully on, and then I would start initiating, and so it's like it was like an energetic and a postural initiation of, like, "What's wrong? Is everything okay? Did I do something wrong? Are you mad at me?" Like, this, like, line of questioning, very
Yeah.
nervous and anxious, and then, like, I would ask those questions, and I would just get these, like, flat, one-word answers with, like, no expression, like, nothing.
Yeah.
And so then I would be like, "What's wrong? Is everything okay?" And my mom would be like, "Yeah, it's fine." And, like, I think I was just like, "Okay, you're my mom and you love me and I'm supposed to believe what you say, but also, like, energy doesn't lie." Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not
Magic.
you're telling me everything's fine, but, like, everything in my body is like, everything is not fucking fine, Like, it's not fine, but she's, "Oh, it's fine." And so then I would be like, "Did I do something wrong?" And she'd be like, "No." "Is there
Mm.
anything I can do to help?" "No, it's fine." Just and so, like, by that point, if you can imagine, like a wounded animal inside of me just, like, clawing and, like, just
Mhm.
feeling so scared, like, that's what it was like, and so when I couldn't get anything out of her that way, then I would start, like, doing things to try to
Mm.
get her to notice me, so I would, like, start cleaning something or, I'd pull a straight A report card out of my backpack, like, "Maybe this'll do it," Just, like,
Yeah.
anything. It's like throwing spaghetti against a wall and hoping eventually I'm gonna land on something that's gonna make her snap out of this trance that she's in and, like, actually pay attention to me and connect with me and be my mom?
Uh,
But it was never consistent. Like, sometimes the straight A report card would do the trick, sometimes it didn't, but I never knew.
yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of the pattern that I grew up with in my childhood. I mean, there's way more than that, but that's just like one really
Yeah.
common pattern. So then now fast forward to 2022, um, I'm taking care of my mom and of course, like she's in pain. She's just had major surgery. She has a giant cut in her back. She's got,
Mhm.
you know, stitches and staples and like she's on pain medication and she's been under general anesthesia. Like, of course, my mom is not going to be like at her best emotionally, right? So like I went down there with that in mind, like knowing that she might be cranky, that she might be in a lot of pain, she might say things she doesn't mean or doesn't remember. Like I totally was aware that that would happen.
Yeah.
But I wasn't prepared to get as triggered as I got whenever she started, like, going into some of those passive aggressive silent treatment kind of patterns,
Yeah.
and, so yeah, I'm really proud of myself for how I handled some of that because I did stand up for myself and, like, when my mom was being, like, huffy and um, not using her words, but, like, you could tell something was wrong just by how she was breathing and, like, tapping on her
Mm.
phone, you could, like, tell. And so I
Oh,
I
yeah.
would be like, "Okay, mom, I can tell by the way you're breathing and by the way you're tapping on your phone that something's not okay. Can you please use your words and tell me what's going on? Because I
Yeah.
don't know what's the matter right now, but if you'll tell me, I'll try to help?" And on this one afternoon with this one instance of her actually, like, tapping on her phone really loudly and huffing and puffing as she's sighing, and I'm, like, in the kitchen washing the dishes, hearing this happening, like, "Okay, something's going on."
Yeah.
So she finally comes out with she's like, "Lindsay, I'm just bored." And I
Mm.
was like, "Of course you are.
Yeah.
Like, neither one of us was prepared for you to be bored after this surgery. Both of us were
Mhm.
thinking that you'd probably be, like, so hyped up on pain meds and you'd be, like, so groggy and in pain that you wouldn't wanna do anything, and that's not what's
Yeah.
happening. So you're bored, of course you're bored. So, would you like for me to go to the store and get you, like, a coloring book and some markers? Would you like me to download a new game on your phone? Would you like to watch a new movie? Like, I can go, like, find us a movie on Netflix to watch." I brought this book. Would you like me to read to you? Like, I start like coming up with all of these solutions.
Yeah.
And then I shit you not, my mom was like, "It's fine. I'll do it myself."
Okay.
And it was just,
I'm trying to connect with you right
and
now.
it's just like, lady, you have an 8-inch scar down your back with staples and you're wearing a back brace. You're not going to jump in the car and go buy yourself a fucking coloring book. Like, and I just lost my shit, like lost it,
Oh,
and was just like, this is not okay, mother. Like, you're an adult. Use your words. Tell me what you need. Tell me how you feel. I'm more than happy to do whatever you need. I'm here to take care of you. I'm literally here to serve you in whatever way you need, but I'm not a mind reader and I need you to tell me what you need. And
yeah.
then she's like, "You're just talking to me like you're a therapist." And I'm just like, there's like no fucking winning. This was my mom in my childhood. This was my mom. Okay? Like, it so
Yeah.
after the trip to Texas, I got back, and for like a week afterwards, I was like texting her every day or calling her to be like, "How are you feeling? Have you started physical therapy yet? What's going on?" And I was only getting back these like one-word answers. And
Mm.
even though I know like it's not cool to like try to inject a tone into a text message because that's often how miscommunication happens, I
Right.
know my mother well enough to know the tone that was there. Like, and it was that same sort of like passive aggressive silent treatment. I'm not giving you anything, like kind of
Yeah.
thing. So I backed off. I was like, I wish that she had the words to be able to say, "Lindsay, I don't want to talk to you right now. You hurt my feelings when you came and stayed with me." Like, that's what she needed to say. She couldn't say that. But I needed to change the pattern of how I related to my mom.
Yes.
So I just backed off. I was like, I am going to take these short one-word answers. I'm going to perceive them as a boundary. And I'm
Mm.
perceiving that you don't want to talk about this. So I'm going to respect that. And I'm not going to text you and talk about this anymore. So I just stopped reaching out.
Yeah.
And then a month went by, and another month went by, and another month went by. In April of 2023, so we're talking from October of 2022 to April of 2023,
Yeah.
I got an email from my mom. And the email was just like, "The way you treated me and the way you spoke to me when you were here after my back surgery was absolutely unacceptable. I will not tolerate you ever talking to me that way again. I'm not interested in having a conversation with you at all unless you can apologize for how you treated me." So I was like, okay, well, she's using her words. Like, clearly she's
Yeah.
mad. Like, okay, I can respect that she's angry about something. Like, I did yell at her. So it makes sense that she's angry.
Right.
So I emailed back and I was like, "I think we both have things that we need to say to each other. So would you be interested in having a mutually beneficial conversation?" And she emailed back and she was just like, "I am." But that was it.
Yeah.
So then I found myself kind of scratching my head and being like, okay, does this mean I'm now responsible for like initiating this and scheduling this and setting it up? Like, is that what this means? And so then I was like, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. So another few months went by. My birthday came around. She wished me happy birthday. I asked if we could talk on my birthday. She was like, "Well, I've got a lot going on today, but I'll see. We'll check in later." My mom doesn't have shit going on, dude. Like, my mom has no life whatsoever. She's single. She doesn't date. She like, really. My birthday was on a Sunday. I'm like, "What are you fucking doing on a Sunday that you can't
Yeah.
call me?" Right? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So she's like, "I'll check back in with you later." Well, she never did. So
Mm.
another couple months went by and then it was her birthday, and so I texted her on her birthday. So, yeah, for like a year and a half, we did this like weird dance.
Mm.
But I think the most important thing for me during that entire time, what especially like the first 6 or 7 months, was like I noticed in myself that pattern of like wanting to initiate, like, "Is everything okay? Are we okay? Are you mad
Mhm.
at me? What's going on? What can I do to fix this?" Like, I noticed that there, and it would be like my phone would be like sitting, and I would be like, "Oh, I think I'm just gonna reach out and text her and just ask?" And I'd be like, "No." Like, just like, "Oh, maybe no." It really was like extreme self-control that I had to have because I could tell that the part of me that was like wanting to connect with her was not my highest, wisest adult self. It was this like
Yeah.
abandoned child that was so used to this pattern of using her fight flight response to pursue and initiate contact and connection with her mother. And I had to prove to myself, I'm not that abandoned child anymore. Like, I am an adult woman. If my mom can't behave like an adult and just talk to me with words, like, that's not my problem. You know, I'm here, I'm available. I've never gone no contact with her. I don't plan on ever going no contact with her. I'm so available, but I cannot be responsible for maintaining and initiating this relationship. Like, I can't.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, after I, hit my hand away a few times, it became a lot easier. And
Mhm.
I noticed how my annoyance with her transformed into this anxious attachment, abandoned energy. And then I had this big wave of anger where I basically like played a movie in my head of like so much childhood shit and like pretended that she was standing in front of me and just screamed at
Mm.
her and like hit a pillow like I was hitting her. I mean, it was like pretty violent shit, but I'm like doing it consciously by myself, so I'm not hurting anyone. So I
Right.
went through this big anger movement, and then after the anger movement, it kind of like died down to like a sadness, just like,
Yeah.
I'm really sad that this is the state of my relationship with my mom. This is never what I wanted. But I think it was also the first time in my life that I'd really let myself accept the reality of what my relationship was with her. Like, it had always been this way. But as long as I was relating to her as an abandoned child, then there was always this like false hope that like maybe things
Mhm.
will be different this time. Maybe things will be better this time, you know? And I had to learn how to stop relating to my mom as an abandoned child because if she had it within her to give me what I needed, she would have.
Right.
And I had to go through this like, hurt, self-control with pursuing her, and then anger, and then finally to this place of like acceptance, you know?
Yeah.
And that took me like, well, I recorded a podcast, a solo podcast whenever it had been a year since I'd spoken to her. I recorded a podcast. And then after that, I was like, I need to write her a letter. And
Mm.
so I thought the letter I was gonna write her was a rage letter. I thought I was just gonna, like, rage and rage and rage and never send it, you know?
Yeah.
But actually, whenever I sat down to start writing the letter, an image of my mom's, like, 3rd grade school picture popped into my head, and, like, I saw this, like, little girl with, like, barely a smile, and her bangs were cut crooked because my grandmother trimmed her bangs the morning before her school picture, so her
Oh, no.
bangs were a little bit crooked. And she just had this sort of sad smile on her face, and that's
Yeah.
who I ended up writing the letter to, was, like, the 8-year-old version of my mom. And as the words, like, came out, I realized, like, how much compassion I actually felt for her, and that I came to this deep understanding of, like, I feel torn between the knowledge and the understanding that you were never going to be able to give me what I needed because you didn't have it to give, and that's not
Yeah.
your fault.
Yeah.
And also the very real, like, knowing that you are also completely responsible for most of my trauma. And, like, that dissonance, that you feel where
Yeah.
you're like, "Yeah, you don't have it to give. Like, it's unfair for me to keep expecting you to give something you don't have to give, right? And I understand why you don't have it." Like,
Yeah.
I understand. My mom had a fucking awful childhood, like, so awful. I can't even begin to describe to you how awful. So, of course, she didn't have it to give.
Yeah.
And
She didn't.
also, like, because she didn't have it to give, that wired me and my body to be, like, this abandoned child my whole life, you know?
Yeah.
I don't identify with the abandoned child anymore, but she's definitely a part of me, and she definitely still gets
Yeah.
triggered, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, So yeah, I wrote it all out and I said things like, "I wish I could go back and be the mother you needed so you could have been the mother I needed." And like, it's not your fault that you didn't have it to give, and it is your fault at the same time because you weren't supposed to pass it on to me. Like, it was full of so much dissonance, and it was full of me telling that, like, 8-year-old version of my mom, like, how special she was and how sorry I was that she didn't get, like, the love and the tenderness that she needed and that her mother didn't, and, like, it was like a generational healing letter too. Like, I went back multiple generations, like, I was like, this you know, like, division between mother and daughter is like this, like, wordless, like, thing that keeps happening in our maternal lineage, but it's, like, demanding to be named so that we stop it. Like,
Yes.
we have to name it so that we can stop it. So I'm naming it in this letter. And then I like talked about how, like, even though I knew I wasn't a perfect mother, that like I'm 1,000% certain that my daughter has like less trauma than I do and that she like knows that I am emotionally there for her, like no
Yeah.
matter what, you know?
I mean, yeah, she knew to come and talk to you when she was having
Yeah.
these things come up.
Yeah.
Like, that's huge.
Yeah. So, I don't know
Mm.
if I directly answered your question, but where I'm at with, like, my relationship with my mom and my abandonment and all of that now is I feel very neutral about
Yeah.
my mom. I don't feel a big emotional charge anymore. I'm not mad at her. I'm not sad
Mm.
anymore. I fully understand and accept why she is the way she is. I also know that if she doesn't wanna be the way she is anymore, that it's her responsibility to seek out help and support for that. She's
Yeah.
never done that before. It's not my job to tell her to do that. Like, that has to be
Right.
something she wants to do for herself. So, I'm just at this place of neutrality where I'm like, "If you initiate contact with me, great. If you don't, I'm okay." Like, whether we're
Yeah.
together or apart, I trust that we'll both be okay. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Gosh. There's so much. I was just, like, writing notes. I'm like, "This is great," because I can see. Yeah, it's really tough when you get older, you have the maturity, you have the awareness that your parents don't have, and you want them to so badly, you're always trying to connect with them in that way. Um, so what are some and then the other thing was, like, um, gosh, well, then you were talking about, like, as a child, like, let me get my all because like, you had the confusion in your body. You're like, "Okay, my body's telling me one thing, the outside energy is telling me another thing." How does that impact you the rest of your life? And like, how has that impacted, how does this impact your relationship with your husband too? Those abandonment issues that can come up in partnership. And then what are some tools that you implement to help yourself when you notice that you are
Mhm.
maybe kind of going into those moments?
Okay, so there was 3 parts to that question.
I know.
I just wanna make sure I got the part straight.
Yeah.
The 3rd part is, like, how does that show up in my relationship with my husband, and what are some things that I
Mm.
use to get through that? The 2nd question was
Yeah, and I think I was just kind of talking too, so if
okay,
we don't get to like,
well, they were all
and it
really good questions. That's true.
yeah, the confusion body, where you have, like, your body saying one thing, but the outside
Yeah. Yeah,
signals
I mean, I think, like,
different things.
I
Okay.
can't I mean, the church my upbringing in the church also had a lot to do with that too, right? So it's
Mm, mhm.
yes, in my relationship with my mom, my body constantly felt like there was something wrong, and, like, I was looking to her for, like, either proof or confirmation that something wasn't wrong or that everything was actually okay. But then I also had this added layer of growing up in the Southern Baptist church in the Bible Belt. So it was like, I don't know how many of your listeners grew up in that environment or are familiar with it, but like evangelicalism in the South is like very, very fundamentalist as a
Mm.
religion. And so within that fundamentalism, the opinion or the view of women is that like okay, so the view of women is that like women are supposed to be submitted to men and like they're supposed to be
Mhm.
modest and like cover their bodies and all of that.
Yep.
Aside from just being a woman, just like the overall umbrella of Christianity, of evangelicalism and even like scripture that is taken out of context and like weaponized to get people to submit or whatever is,
Mm.
things like there's a scripture in the book of Jeremiah that's like, the heart is wicked above all things. Who can trust it? And like memorized that verse. What does that verse tell you? It tells you that your heart is wicked and that you can't trust it.
Yeah.
And then, there's another verse in like Proverbs that's like, um, trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. So it's like you can't trust your own understanding or your own perspective of something. So like, yeah, I have these confusing messages from my mom being like, everything's fine when it's not. But then I also have the church being like, you can't trust your intuition. You can't trust your heart. You can't trust your own knowing because God knows something different and that's better and higher than what you know. So like
Yeah.
it completely ripped me out of my body where I just
Yeah.
like lived this existence in my head, which is
Mm.
why I had so much anxiety because I was just thinking and overthinking and ruminating and catastrophizing like
Yeah.
all the time as my way of moving through the world. Like, of course I was fucking anxious all the time. Of course I had an anxiety disorder. You know what I mean? Like, of
Sure.
course. So how that shows up in my relationship with my husband is I would say that probably my main sign that I'm triggered in an abandonment trigger is I become very hypervigilant.
Mm.
So what I mean by that is if I sense, if I perceive that my husband is like more withdrawn than usual, like
Mhm.
maybe he's not talking to me as much today as he has over the last few days,
Yeah.
then that immediately sets off an alarm in my body because his withdrawal, my perception of his withdrawal, being very careful about my language here, my perception of David's withdrawal from me, which
Mm.
may not be rooted in fact, um, reminds me somatically of what it felt like when my mom was like that.
Yes.
So it's like, even though that's not what's actually happening with my husband, that abandoned part doesn't understand the difference the way that my adult self understands the difference.
Mhm.
So I get really hypervigilant. And I know now, with the awareness I have now, that the hypervigilance that I developed started long, long ago in my childhood because I mean our bodies are so smart and it's like if the body can ramp up its ability to be aware of everything,
Yeah.
then the belief is like, maybe I can be aware of something before it happens and then stop it from happening. So if I can be extra sensitive to
Mm.
the sound of my mother's footsteps or how much noise she's making when she slams a kitchen cabinet door, then maybe I'll know what her emotional state is
And I can adjust
and I
accordingly.
can adjust accordingly. Exactly. So, in my
Mm.
relationship with David now, when I perceive that he's a little bit more withdrawn than usual, like the hypervigilance kicks in
Yeah.
and the same, like, what's the matter? Are you mad at me? Is everything okay? Kind of that initiating, leaning in, trying to figure out what did I do wrong here? How can we make this right? That happens. And then if I don't catch it, I can pick a fight.
Mm.
Which I think is a really good thing because I think if my child self had had access to that, like, she would have fucking protested mom doing that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think the fact that I can access that little bit of fight now is great.
Mhm.
However, it's misdirected because my husband isn't actually emotionally abandoning me. It's just I perceive that because my body is responding as if that's what's happening.
Yeah.
So what I have learned to do, and if anyone has any better ideas, I would love to hear them. But what I've learned to do that has worked really well in our relationship is obviously it's my responsibility to catch myself being like that.
Mm.
So what I will then do when I notice, oh, okay, I'm hyper aware or I'm hyper vigilant. So clearly I'm triggered. Like some part of me is feeling insecure and abandoned. And so what I will
Mhm.
do is I will go to David and I will say, I'm perceiving that you're more withdrawn than usual. And the story I'm telling myself about that is that you're mad at me or that you're going to leave me or that I've done something wrong. But Is that what's actually happening? And like, literally not once has he been like, yep, that's what's happening. You know, literally never once. So it's been really important for me to develop that language and the ability to
Mhm.
communicate that, because I know that if I was to like go within myself and start trying to offer myself all of this reassurance and be like, everything is fine, everything's fine, you always do this, like, he's not leaving you. Like, sure. Am I capable of doing that? Absolutely. Does that actually help me move through the trigger? No. Like, no, it just puts me in my head even more. So
Yep.
I don't feel like I'm like outsourcing my safety or my well-being to my husband. I feel like I'm using my agency, and I can use that energy to pick a fight with him. Or I can use that
Mhm.
energy to get passive aggressive with him for sure. Or I can use that energy to like be like, hey, this is what's happening for me. Is this real? You know?
Yeah.
And then he can just tell me like, no, that's not real. Or yes, it is real. Let's talk about it. You know?
Right.
And then it, like, avoids all the drama and the fight and the passive aggressiveness and, like, it just bypasses all of that, and it's like, "Oh, okay, what's really
Yeah.
happening is that I didn't sleep that great last night, so that's why I'm a little more withdrawn than usual. Actually has nothing to do with you." I mean, this is what honestly, this might be a really hot take, but I think that this is, like, a form of my own fucking narcissism, if you want to tell you the truth, right? Like, honestly, because it's like, in this
Of
moment,
course, it has to do something with me. What do you mean?
exactly. What do you mean it doesn't have to do with me? Doesn't everything you do have to do with me? Right? Like, honestly, but that's like children are narcissistic. Like,
Yep.
the world has to revolve around a child in order for it to survive, you know? So when I
Yep.
say like it's narcissistic, I'm talking about the abandoned part of me. Like, it's
Right.
the abandoned part that's like, let's make
Mm.
this all about me. Let's not make this about you just being tired because you didn't sleep good last
Yeah.
night. Let's make it about me and my abandonment issues.
Mm. Oh my gosh, I love 2 things that you said there. 1, you said it's my responsibility to identify and be aware of what's going on. And then I love the phrase, "the story I'm telling myself." We use that, and I think it's so powerful for when you do come into conversations with somebody and, partner or whatever, and it helps them to not immediately go on the defensive.
Yeah.
The story I'm telling myself is XYZ, and they can listen, actively rather than defensively, so I love both of those. Um, yeah. Can you share, just a few things that you like to do? Are there some, like, daily practices that you do to just kind of help with, like, nervous system regulation or something that some of our listeners can start implementing themselves as they might now resonate with some of your story or all of your story and now have this awareness like, "Oh, okay, I've gotta do some stuff."
Yeah. Well, this isn't really a nervous system tool, but I actually don't think the nervous system tools are as important as we think they are.
Mm,
My first and probably most important piece of advice that I would give to anyone listening is to start having awareness, to start practicing awareness. What do I mean by awareness? Well, you can have cognitive awareness, which is like,
mhm,
I am aware that I'm telling myself this story, right? Because that story exists in your mind.
yeah,
I'm aware that I have this belief about this thing that might not actually be true.
mm,
So that's cognitive awareness, but then also somatic awareness, which is like, what do I feel in my body?
mhm,
So like, I'm not triggered because David is more withdrawn. I'm triggered because of the sensation in my body that means there's something wrong, right? So the feeling is not reflective of fact, but the feeling is still deserving of presence and curiosity.
yeah,
So when I notice that feeling in my body, then I have somatic awareness. So it's like, what am I feeling and where am I feeling it?
mm,
And then, what's the story underneath this or what's the pain underneath this or so it's like having this like somatic and cognitive awareness process and being really curious to whatever answers my body might give me, because sensation is the language of the body. Like,
mm,
the body doesn't speak in English or Chinese or French or Spanish. The body speaks in sensation.
yeah,
And like it's like learning another language whenever you start listening to your body, because now instead of like listening with your ears and cognitively translating like you would learning another language, you're actually like listening with your body and then learning to translate through intuition and cognitive awareness.
Yeah.
So, that's a practice, but that's where all of the discomfort starts anyway. Like that's where the trigger lives. That's where the story lives. It all lives in your body. And you probably have the lived experience to prove that the story you're telling yourself was true at one point. But
Mhm.
sometimes we get stuck in those stories and then it's like they're always true when they're not. But the triggered part is reacting as if it is. So
Mm.
I think that being able to meet yourself with just curiosity and presence is like so important. Like, huh, isn't it interesting that he didn't sleep well last night and he's more withdrawn today? And I think that means he's going to leave me. Isn't that so funny? Like that's such a more lighthearted way of relating to oneself
Yeah.
versus, picking a fight. Ugh, every time you do this, like, I just think you're going to leave me and I wish you wouldn't do this. I wish you would just get a good night's sleep so you aren't withdrawn the next day. Like
Yeah.
that's such an unrealistic, but that would be me trying to like
How dare you have
avoid.
your own experiences.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, beyond a nervous system tool, like, I think it's more important to have just like awareness.
For
And
sure.
awareness is curious and it's not judgmental. And it's just like, oh, this is what's happening. Isn't this interesting?
Mm.
Like, I wonder what purpose this serves for me.
Yeah.
Is the action I'm taking or the words I'm speaking aligned with the outcome I want? Like that's another huge awareness question. If you're aware that you want like a happy partnership and you communicate well with your partner, then when you make the decision to be passive aggressive and like slam the door, you're not making a choice that aligns with the outcome you want.
Yeah.
Well, you have to have conscious awareness of that to even know so that you can make a different choice that aligns with the outcome you want. So, really, the basis of all of my work is not the nervous system, it's actually consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. Oh, this was so
Oh,
great.
I'm glad you liked it. I've
Yeah,
had a lot of
I'm
fun.
I'm so excited. Like I said, we followed you for a while, so I was, like, really excited just to, like,
Yay.
hear all the things. Is there any last minute shares that you would like
Hmm.
offer or let everybody know where they can find you?
I don't think there's any last minute shares that I have. I mean, I'm happy to answer any additional questions you have.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think we unpacked
we covered it?
a lot. I think, we could definitely do a whole other podcast on some, like, more specific
Yeah.
things as well. Um,
Yeah, let me
I
think of the podcast episode that I recorded about my mom. I'll just go to Spotify really fast and find it and then I'll mention it and people can listen to it if they want to. How does that sound?
Yeah, that's great, and we can link it in the show notes as well.
Okay.
Are you
Perfect. Yeah, I'm on my second screen, like looking at Spotify right now. Okay, so the conversation with my daughter where she like came to me and told me about her like voice in her head about her eating is on my podcast, which is Holistic Trauma Healing. It's episode 110. And then episode 103 is called A Year Without My Mother: Reflections on Complex PTSD and Abandonment Triggers.
Oh,
That was
yeah.
that was a year ago this month. Yeah.
Wow, yeah. Well, we will link both of those, and I will be listening to those as well.
Awesome.
Very interested, but thank you, Lindsay, so much for being
Yeah.
on today and sharing your story and your insights and just being you and doing the work that
Thank
you're doing.
you.
I
Thanks for having me,
appreciate
Brianna. I appreciate
it.
it.
All right, everyone. We'll see you next week.